FLM, wide open thinking, world-class work, and far-reaching results. Now with locations in Minneapolis, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Washington, D.C. A strategic marketing and communications company dedicated to serving clients who specialize in the business of agriculture and the life of rural communities.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And it was a short day at the end of a long week, at the end of a long month, really, here in Washington. Very busy December on Capitol Hill. And here, recording this on a Friday, and today, the House passed the Omnibus spending bill. On Thursday, they passed the tax extenders, and on today, the Senate passed both, so those bills are both headed to President Obama's desk. No indications that he will not sign either piece of legislation, so it looks as if the extenders and the omnibus bill are looking to become law as soon as his pen can hit the paper on those. So Phil, want to discuss a little bit. We've done some reviews and some overlooking pieces of work on agripulse.com as far as these pieces of legislation. But just as a quick review, what's in, what's out. So we'll start with what's in for agriculturally speaking for the omnibus.
Right. Well, this is a bill they're actually put together before they finally passed the Senate. One massive bill. The omnibus, as we call it, piece, that funds the entire federal government through September 30th, the rest of fiscal 2016. Well over $1 trillion in spending. That includes this repeal of country of origin labeling rules for beef and pork. That addresses the WTO case and presumably will avert $1 billion in retaliatory tariffs that we've been talking about here for couple of weeks and long before that even.
Yeah, and the language in this bill actually had a little bit less teeth than a bill passed by the House in June. That repealed cool provisions for both for all of beef, pork, and poultry products. Now we're just looking at beef and pork, so a little bit less, a touch of a compromise there for some cool advocates in the Senate that weren't wanting to see the beef and pork provisions go away. But that was kind of a necessary thing to happen if you were going to stop that Canadian-Mexican retaliation.
Yeah, a couple more things that worth noting. There's a significant increase in this bill for the Food and Drug Administration. They are having to implement the new Food Safety Modernization Act. They enforce are responsible for about 80% of the food supply, including fresh produce, and one of the new rules sets standards for growing and handling fresh produce. They got basically what the administration asked for in order to do the enforcement, the training, because a lot of the work is going to be done by state agencies and others. So they got the money for that. The cotton industry got some relief from farm program payment limits in the form of resurrection of the old certificate program. That's something they say they needed because of the sharp drop in cotton prices, which is blamed on what China has done in terms of manipulating the market, building up huge stockpiles, and now putting them out on the market.
Right, so a lot of things, it's a massive bill. There's a lot of things inside and outside of agriculture that are addressed in this piece of legislation, but a lot of things happen to ag-wise in the omnibus and also in the tax extenders, something that a lot of folks were hoping for, especially in terms of agriculture and really in small businesses as a whole, is a permanent extension of Section 179 allowance, and that is basically a provision. Currently, deductions are set at $25,000. This permanently expands those to $500,000. And Phil, there are a lot of folks that wanted to see this, and it was thought it was going to be maybe they've been doing year-by-year extensions for a long time, but now they've got it permanently extended.
Yeah. As you well know from your own family,
right?
This expensing allowance is widely used for tractors, combines, and all sorts of other equipment. Very important. They also extended they made that permanent. They also extended, but didn't make it permanent, the bonus depreciation provision, which is also widely used in agriculture as well. We also should mention that they extended through next year the $1 a gallon tax credit for biodiesel, investment credit for ethanol and biodiesel pumping units, facilities, and also the tax credit that subsidizes cellulosic, the next generation ethanol.
And some interesting implications on the extension of that biodiesel tax credit. And Phil actually had a very good story on that yesterday on Agri-Pulse.com. We don't really have time to delve into the nuts and bolts of that issue right now, but I would definitely encourage you to take a read on that piece. Want to move on a little bit. We've talked about what is in these pieces of legislation. Now there's a lot of things, agriculturally speaking, that aren't in there. Chiefly is probably some kind of a compromise legislatively on the waters of the U.S. rule between the GOP and the administration and some Democrats on Capitol Hill that are in support of the rule. There are a lot of folks that were hoping that something would happen that would happen on WOTUS in the Omnibus spending bill. There's currently a stay or a suspension of the rule issued by the court system that could be lifted at any point. So opponents to that rule were hoping for something on WOTUS, but it doesn't appear that that's going to happen. I mean, it obviously isn't going to happen in the Omnibus since it's already passed. But
part of the big trade that was made to pass this bill was the Republicans wanted an end to the ban on oil exports.
Right.
They essentially traded that ban on or lifting that ban on oil exports for a number of environmental riders that they wanted, and so this bill is. There's almost nothing in the way of endangered species except for continuing a bar on the listing of the sage grouse, which is not happening anytime soon anyway. Fish and Wildlife Service already decided not to list it. And as you say, with the what we call the WOTUS rule, the Waters of the U.S. rule, it was left alone, and that was a high priority for the administration. There also there's nothing on the greenhouse gas regulations that the administration is also implementing. Those are going to go ahead and go forward.
Now, Phil, you were telling me before we pressed record that you were talking with Pat Roberts, the chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee, and he told you about some priorities and some things that he wants to accomplish pretty early into 2016 with his committee. Yeah,
well, there's some big things on the to-do list left over from this bill, and one of them is biotech labeling. We have this law in Vermont that takes effect in July that requires foods to be labeled if they have genetically engineered ingredients. The food industry and biotech companies are very, very anxious about that law taking effect and want Congress to step in and block Vermont and any other states, New York and Connecticut, are possibly considering similar laws. Pat Roberts said that the chairman of Senate Agriculture said that they would take up this issue in January. There's still some negotiations that have to take place, but certainly I think the industry is ready to talk. They really want to get that done as soon as possible. There's two other major pieces of legislation that Senator Roberts is planning to act on and says he wants to get done by February, and that's a reauthorization of school nutrition standards. He's got a draft bill of 200-something pages ready to go. The House objected, House Speaker Paul Ryan's staff objected to putting that into this omnibus bill, but it's ready to go. Probably a little more negotiations with the House on that. He wants to act on that in January. And the third thing on his to-do list is a reauthorization of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. There's been some back and forth between Republicans and Democrats over some new requirements that the Republicans want to put on CFTC.
So as busy as Congress was this last month, there's still enough to keep us busy at Agri-Pulse going into 2016. But I mean, it hasn't been an unfamiliar remark to say that Congress just wasn't accomplishing much these last couple of years, and they just weren't getting a lot of legislation passed. Goodness, this last month or two, they've really gotten after it.
Absolutely remarkable. Starting with that, starting with the two-year budget agreement back in October, but Then we had the 5-year highway bill, Spencer, that you covered. And I believe that was the longest term surface transportation bill, 17 years?
I know at least a decade, and 17 years might not be too far off. It was quite a legislative accomplishment when they were able to get that done. And you look at the voting margins on the omnibus that passed today. The House was well over 300 votes, and the Senate was, I believe, a solid 65
votes.
Yeah,
right.
So,
and the tax bill, which passed separately in the House, also had over 300 votes.
So not only are they passing things, they're passing things by a pretty wide margin. It'll be interesting to see if that carries over into 2016.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to do it for not only this video, but for these videos in all of 2015. We certainly appreciate the participation that we've gotten from our viewing audience on these. We love hearing the interaction and the feedback from all of you. So if you have any comments, please feel free to reach out to either Phil or I, and we'd love to hear it. Certainly, Phil and I are both looking forward to celebrating Christmas with our families and the New Year as well. Whatever you're celebrating this holiday season, we at Agri-Pulse hope you enjoy it with people that you care about. For Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.